The room went completely silent when the young woman calmly pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down in the seat everyone knew belonged to the wife. She smiled as though she had every right to be there, while the wife stood only a few feet away, holding a folded napkin in trembling hands. Her husband said nothing. His mother looked away. But then an elderly woman at the other end of the table slowly pushed herself to her feet, and what she shouted next froze every person in the mansion. Before we continue, if you believe kindness, loyalty, and second chances can change a person's life, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, and subscribe to Kindness Thread. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this to you. For 6 years, Elena had believed that marriage meant standing beside someone through every storm. She had married Daniel when neither of them had much. They rented a tiny apartment, shared one old car, and celebrated their first anniversary with a homemade dinner because they could not afford a restaurant. Elena never complained. When Daniel started his company, she worked late nights at home helping him organize invoices, answering emails, and encouraging him whenever investors rejected his ideas. Slowly, everything changed. His company became successful, their apartment became a mansion, and the simple man Elena had married became a wealthy businessman whose name appeared in newspapers. But while Daniel's bank account grew, the distance between him and Elena grew even faster. At first, Elena blamed the pressure of his work. Then came the late nights, unexplained meetings, and constant excuses. Daniel stopped asking about her day. He stopped noticing when she was tired. Eventually, Elena discovered the truth. There was another woman named Vanessa. She was younger, confident, and had become a regular presence at Daniel's business events. Elena found photographs of them together and messages that left no room for excuses. Her heart broke, but she did not create a scene. She simply asked Daniel one question, whether their marriage still meant anything to him. Daniel could not answer. That silence was more painful than any confession. Elena stayed in the mansion for one reason: Daniel's grandmother, Margaret. The elderly woman had always treated Elena like a granddaughter rather than an in-law. When everyone else praised Daniel's success, Margaret remembered who had stood beside him when he had nothing. She noticed Elena's sadness long before anyone else did. But Margaret had recently been recovering from an illness, and Elena refused to abandon her. Every morning, Elena brought her breakfast, helped organize her medicine, and sat beside her when she felt lonely. Then came the family dinner that changed everything. Daniel had invited relatives and several important business associates to the mansion. Elena spent the afternoon helping the staff prepare the dining room. She arranged flowers, checked the table settings, and made sure Margaret's favorite dishes were ready. She still hoped that perhaps Daniel would finally speak to her honestly. Instead, when the guests arrived, Vanessa walked through the front doors wearing an elegant dress and carrying herself as though she already belonged to the family. Elena's stomach tightened. Daniel greeted Vanessa without embarrassment. He introduced her to several guests as someone who had been helping with the company. Nobody believed the excuse, but nobody challenged him either. Elena quietly stepped aside. She had learned that sometimes humiliation became worse when you fought against it in front of strangers. When dinner was announced, everyone began taking their seats. Elena approached the chair beside Daniel, the place she had occupied for 6 years. Before she could sit down, Vanessa walked over, pulled the chair out, and sat in it herself. The room became painfully quiet. Vanessa looked at Elena and gave a small smile. Then she casually reached for her glass as though nothing unusual had happened. Daniel glanced toward Elena but said nothing. His silence told her everything. For a moment, Elena felt as though the entire mansion had disappeared beneath her feet. She looked at the chair where she had once celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and Daniel's greatest victories. She remembered sitting there when they had received their first major business contract. She remembered Daniel holding her hand beneath the table because he was nervous. She remembered all the nights she had believed they were building a future together. Now another woman was sitting in her place. Elena lowered her eyes and turned to walk away. That was when Margaret's chair scraped loudly against the floor. The elderly woman stood with surprising strength. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp. Everyone turned toward her. Margaret looked directly at Vanessa and pointed toward the chair. "Get up." Vanessa's smile disappeared. Margaret's voice shook the entire dining room. She reminded everyone that the chair was never simply a piece of furniture. It represented the woman who had stood beside Daniel when he had nothing. It belonged to the person who had sacrificed quietly without demanding applause. Then Margaret turned toward Daniel. She asked him where he had been when Elena worked nights helping him build his company. Where was Vanessa when Elena sold her jewelry to help cover the company's early expenses? Where was Vanessa when Daniel's first major deal failed and he came home convinced he was a failure? Elena had been there through every one of those moments. Daniel's face changed. He had forgotten. Not because the memories had disappeared, but because success had made him too comfortable to remember them. Vanessa finally stood. But Margaret wasn't finished. She told Daniel that wealth could buy a bigger house, expensive cars, and impressive dinners, but it could never buy back a person's dignity after they had destroyed it. Elena's eyes filled with tears. She expected Daniel to defend himself. Instead, he walked toward her and admitted that he had been selfish. He said he had confused success with happiness and attention with love. He apologized, but Elena did not immediately forgive him. She told him something everyone in the room needed to hear: forgiveness was not the same as forgetting. She had spent years giving pieces of herself away to protect their marriage. She was not going to spend the rest of her life proving that she deserved respect. Daniel finally understood that the woman standing before him was not the quiet wife he had taken for granted. She was the person who had helped build the life he was now risking. The next morning, Elena packed a small suitcase and left the mansion, not because Margaret had told her to, and not because Daniel had demanded it, but because she finally understood that choosing herself was not cruelty. Months passed. Daniel began therapy, stepped away from the company for a while, and started rebuilding the trust he had destroyed. He did not expect Elena to return quickly. Instead, he learned to respect her boundaries. Margaret remained close to Elena and encouraged her to build a life that belonged to her. Eventually, Elena started her own small foundation helping women who had sacrificed their careers and dreams for their families. Daniel supported the foundation without asking for anything in return. 1 year later, Elena returned to the mansion for Margaret's birthday. The dining room looked almost exactly the same. The flowers were arranged beautifully. The table was covered with fine dishes. And there was the same chair. Daniel stood beside it. But this time, he did not pull it out for Vanessa. He pulled it out for Elena, then stepped back. Elena looked at Margaret. The old woman smiled. Elena sat down, not because she was reclaiming a place, but because she had finally realized something far more important. Her worth had never come from a chair. It had never come from a husband. It had never come from a mansion. Her worth had been there all along. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Thread. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who quietly endure until they finally find the courage to choose themselves. And before you go, comment, "I choose dignity," if you believe everyone deserves respect, loyalty, and a second chance, but never at the cost of their self-worth. Because sometimes, the most powerful moment in a person's life isn't when someone finally chooses them. It's when they finally choose themselves.